So in these fragmented landscapes, one, it increases or improves the habitat. Also, typically very little hunting occurs. And so you have two things happen. You have good habitat and reduced mortality. So this is typically where we have a lot of our urban deer issues is some of these fragmented landscapes. Deer are also very adaptable. You'll find them in the forest, farmlands, residential areas, along airport runway zones, along Merritt Parkway. You can drive down there and 10 yards into the tree line, you can see deer walking and bedded down. And even though there's cars going down with broken mufflers and deer whistles on them, they're not even fazed by it. That is just part of life for them. They're used to it, they see it all the time, and it doesn't faze them. So what is the concern about having a lot of prolific and adaptable deer? One is for them to exceed biological and cultural carrying capacity. Biological is really keeping deer in balance with the habitat. The things that affect cultural carrying capacity, which is really human acceptance or tolerance of deer, the things that influence that is how often has someone been in a deer vehicle accident? How often has someone or a member of their family got Lyme disease? Are deer damaging their landscape plantings or their gardens? So these are the things that can affect cultural carrying capacity or human acceptance or tolerance of deer. Obviously, if you've never hit a deer with your vehicle, never had Lyme disease, don't have any plants, then you probably are okay with deer. But if you are experiencing these things, you can get a negative view or perception of deer. So in 1990, we actually had a neat opportunity to demonstrate the impacts deer can have on the ecosystem. This was taken at Bluff Point in Groton. At this point in time, there were 233 deer per square mile. We set up this deer exclosure. It prevents deer from feeding on plants inside the fenced area, but still allows squirrels, birds, and rabbits to go through. So that's what we call our treatment site. Behind it is what we call a control site. Same habitat, grass, same amount of sunlight, same type of soil. The difference is deer have access to the control site, but no access to the treatment site. So this was 1990. 5 years later, the enclosure was engulfed in vegetation, and you can see the fence in the lower portion only because as the vegetation came through the fence, deer were eating it. Yet you see no change outside of the enclosure, still grass habitat. This was 1995. In 1996, we implemented a deer reduction program to reduce it from 233 down to 20 deer per square mile. 5 years after implementing that, you can't even see the deer exclosure, but more importantly, the habitat has changed outside the deer exclosure where deer have access and are feeding. So basically, the deer were too abundant. They were eliminating a lot of the plants, and by reducing that deer population, we improved the habitat. So here's all three photos taken 5 years apart. The top two with no management, the bottom photo with management. The key thing is deer are large herbivores. They eat plants, and if you have a lot of deer, they're going to eat a lot of vegetation. And by them changing the habitat, they indirectly affect all the other wildlife species that depend on that habitat for nesting cover, foraging cover, escape cover. So deer can impact the plant community, other wildlife species, and eventually themselves. We've documented deer dying from overwinter starvation at Bluff Point before we reduced it. We've documented at Charles Island off the coast of Milford and at Shibboleth Island and Sheffield Island. So all these areas, deer had exceeded the capacity of the landscape, and there wasn't enough food to carry the deer population through the winter. So here we're moving to cultural carrying capacity, human acceptance and tolerance of deer. if you planted this hedgerow, I think someone told me the other day they were looking for arborvitaes. They were like $90 each, maybe. But if you planted this hedgerow, and after the winter you saw that you can see right through it, that would probably lower your acceptance or tolerance of deer. And deer can consume 5 to 10 pounds of forage per day. So let's say there were 20 deer at Chapin Point. Those 20 deer, let's say they ate an average of 7 pounds of forage per day, 365 days a year. They consume 51,000 pounds of forage. That's over 25 tons. If you have 20 deer. If you have more, then they're consuming more. So tick-borne diseases is another issue that can lower your acceptance or tolerance of deer. And in a nutshell, the tick has a 2-year life cycle. In the first year, the tick can feed on anything. It could be a bird, a chipmunk, a squirrel, a rabbit, doesn't matter. But during the second year of its life, the female requires a blood meal from a medium to large-sized mammal in order to reproduce and lay thousands of eggs the following spring. So that is the link between deer populations and tick populations. A squirrel or a chipmunk or a blue jay is not big enough to provide that blood meal for the adult tick. Deer are large, they cover a large area, and if they're abundant, it means most of those female ticks will get their blood meal and reproduce and drop eggs. So we had a neat opportunity in one of our studies in Mumford Cove to actually look at this relationship between deer, ticks, and Lyme disease. Mumford Cove is actually on a peninsula, similar to Chapin Point in Groton. And during the first couple of years, we looked at Lyme disease cases in the community and the deer population. So the blue line represents the deer population, the red line represents cases of Lyme disease in the community. So, you know, the deer population ranged from 60 to 100 deer per square mile, and the community had between 13 and 30 cases of Lyme disease a year. This is a community made up of 100 households. So that's not a lot. So to have 13 to 30 cases a year with only 100 households is pretty significant. So the community had open space, and they decided to implement a hunt in 2000 in that open space. And after that, we basically reduced the population down from 77 down to 11 deer per square mile. And cases of Lyme disease dropped from an average of 18 down to 4 cases a year. So by reducing the deer population, it reduced the tick populations and essentially reduced human risk of contracting Lyme disease. So what are the management options? Well, if you aren't concerned about the habitat or landscape or deer vehicle accidents or Lyme disease, you may opt to do nothing. There are a bunch of fencing and repellents. A fence really needs to be 10 feet tall if you want it to be deer proof. Now, an 8-foot tall fence will deter many deer, but it's not deer proof. It needs to be 10 feet tall. The thing about fencing is it does one thing. It protects the plants behind the fence. It doesn't do anything about the deer population. The deer population still exists. Repellents are relatively effective at low deer densities and become less and less effective as deer densities increase. And the reason why is these are taste and smell deterrents. And if the deer population is low, they're going to be selective in what they eat. As the population increases and there's less and less food to go around for all the deer, they become less effective. They become less selective on what they eat. There's one lady that told me she used cayenne pepper and some other hot stuff mixed together and put it on her plants. And that worked well. Then all of a sudden she said, I must have a Mexican deer out there because now they're still eating them. So it worked for a while, but as that population increased, it became less and less effective. Often people will say, well, can't you just trap them and bring them somewhere else? Some studies have looked at this, and what they've concluded is it's incredibly time-consuming and labor-intensive and very difficult to trap enough deer to actually have an impact on the population. And the deer that they trapped and relocated, because they took them out of their familiar home range and dropped them into a new place that they weren't familiar with, they tend to wander great distances, cross roads, and half of those deer got hit by vehicles and died. So all this effort to move these deer to save them, and half died within a year of being relocated, and it actually increased the risk of deer vehicle accidents. The other thing is, where do you bring them? You know, would you, if you know, you can't trap a deer, bring them to Greenwich, you're not going to want them. So fertility control, probably in the past 20 years, had made advances. How it basically works is there's a fertility control agent that you put into a syringe, and with a dart gun you have to dart each deer in the rump, and that will make most of those deer infertile. The problem is, every year they need a booster, which means every year you have to re-dart all the does. And what happens after a couple of years is they end up learning that you're going to dart them, and they begin to avoid you. So in one of our studies, we were darting deer. In the first year, we were driving in the back of a pickup truck and shooting with a dart gun. Then the second year, we get close, and before we got close enough, they backed off. So then we went to night vision gear, but they learn over time to avoid certain things. So the other tricky thing is, it's almost impossible to vaccinate every doe. So if you get every doe but two, well, those two does are going to produce 4 fawns next year. And even if you were lucky enough to vaccinate every doe, the deer are still there. They're still crossing the road, still being fed on by ticks, still eating plants. It takes a long time. It would take a long time for that population to actually reduce over time. So hunting is the most common tool used here in Connecticut and in every other state that has a deer population. The last option is sharpshooting. In 2003, we changed the statutes to allow homeowner associations, nonprofit landholding organizations, and municipalities to apply for a sharpshooting permit to reduce deer. And you may ask, well, what's the difference between sharpshooting and hunting? Well, the biggest difference is hunters volunteer their time, they do it for free. Sharpshooting, you have to pay them to do it. So in the past 20 years that we've had this as an option, only one town, which is Greenwich, applied for a sharpshooting permit. They did it for 1 year and stopped. And so two things. One is it cost them $800 per deer removed, and there was controversy in the community. The hunters were torqued off because they're saying, well, we would do it for free. Why are we using our taxpayer money to pay somebody to do it? And the anti-hunters were mad because they were killing deer. So I'm guessing it's a combination of cost and the conflict, which is probably the reason why Greenwich didn't continue to do the sharpshooting program in future years. So this table just shows you how our hunting season framework has changed and evolved over time. In 1975, when we first had our modern deer hunting season, at that point the goal was to allow this population to continue to grow. So the bag limit was 1 deer per person per year. In the 1990s, as the population really began to escalate, we began to liberalize our deer hunting season framework. And where we are today is that in zones 11, which is Stamford, they can shoot unlimited deer. They can use bait to draw deer in. They can use crossbows, and the season's 4.5 months long. It goes from mid-September to the end of January. So our goal was to make hunting as efficient as possible to reduce deer populations. And it's working, because now we have a lot of hunters complaining they're not seeing the same number of deer they used to see, which is what our goal is. But from a hunting perspective, you know, they want to go out and see deer. So the deer season framework is set by the state. These are the boundaries. For example, the season's 4.5 months long. Private individuals can be more restrictive than the states. For example, if someone has their grandkids coming over on the weekend, someone can say, hey, you can hunt my property Monday through Friday, but don't hunt Saturday and Sunday. Or, hey, the kids are home during winter break, no hunting during winter break. So landowners can put any restrictions in place that they want to. Now, another common one is no field dressing deer on the property. People have dogs, they don't want dogs to find it. But the important thing is, the more restrictions you put in place, the less successful hunting will be. So the biggest hurdle to managing deer is access to private land. I think almost all of Chopin Point is privately owned, or most of it. And the reason why this is a hurdle is, let's say there's a water company land or Chopin Point that's hundreds of acres in size. We can have the season open year-round and have no limit on how many deer can be harvested. But if no hunting's occurring, it doesn't make a difference. You can't impact that population. So access to private land is key for managing deer. So according to Google Earth, Chopin Point is 2/3 of a square mile. Really, there's no blocks of forest. Typically, if we're looking for a place to open up to hunting, we'd be looking for a block of forest. There's no block of forest here. In walking through here a week ago, what I found is deer were using little strips of cover along property boundaries. There's actually 2 deer in this photo here. But you can see the fence. This is the property boundary. There's a little bit of vegetation on the left, a little bit on the right, and it's just big enough to give deer enough cover to spend the day in, and then they come out, well, I know they come out during the day, but they come out more at night to feed. So, if hunting was going to be an option for Chopin Point to reduce deer, one is it would have to be bow hunting. It's really too congested for firearms hunting. You don't need to have hunting occurring on 20 or 30 or 40 properties. All you need is a few key properties that are that have some cover on them, that are relatively big, and they're not surrounded by roads. Ideally, you want to get a group of neighbors to agree to it. One neighbor to say, yes, I'll allow hunting, and adjacent neighbors to say, if you need to cross the property line to retrieve a deer, you have my permission. So you really need probably a group of neighbors to agree. And then you definitely want to use bait. The thing about bait is if you have access to 2 acres and you can bait, then you're pulling in deer from a much larger area, which is why you don't need a lot of properties. You just need to feed a few key properties in the right place with bait. Bait will also allow you to bring deer to a certain part of the property that's suitable for shooting. And if you're confident shooting at 20 yards, you set your tree stand 15 yards from the bait site, so now you know these deer are going to be within range that you're confident in. So bait pulls the deer in, brings them to the part of the property where it's suitable for hunting, and it controls the distance of your shot. So that wraps up my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions that you folks may have. Yes?
Talk about hunters for the hungry.
I can. There are several people that belong to Hunters for the Hungry. And for example, Bluff Point, we remove 18 deer a year from Bluff Point. We go out there in February when the park is closed at night. We remove 18 deer over a 3-day period, and we give those deer to Hunters for the Hungry. Hunters for the Hungry will process those deer and give them to soup kitchens. Yes.
I own a piece of property, it's 50 by 100. And I have deer out every window. Can I use a bow and arrow?
So legally you could. If you have a small property, you probably really want to get permission from your neighbors. Yeah. Yes.
I have 2 questions. First is, as you were describing some of those case studies, you had metrics, average number of deer, was it per acre? I forget.
Square mile, yeah.
Per square mile. How did you establish those metrics? And how could we, for example, establish such a metric?
Okay, so we flew surveys in a helicopter during the wintertime when there's no foliage on the trees and complete snow cover. Now, the past couple of years, we've had troubles flying those surveys. In fact, we flew them this year, but prior to this year, we didn't have snow conditions that were suitable over the past 5 or 6 years. The problem is, the snow comes down, but it sticks to the trees, so you can't see through the trees, so you can't do the survey. Or it's windy, you can't do the survey. Or now, the south-facing slopes, there's no snow, and you can't do the survey. So we'll do those in a helicopter. We recently explored using flare on drones to do surveys, and in some habitats that worked really well, and in some habitats that were really dense, it didn't work that well. But a lot of the work, a lot of the surveys we do, we're concerned about deer impacting the ecosystem. Here, you guys are concerned about landscape plantings, Lyme disease, things like that. So that's more cultural rather than biological. So if it's cultural, then you reduce the deer population until you felt some relief. You're having less damage, you're having less Lyme disease. There's no magic number for what you want for cultural carrying capacity. It's really about public acceptance and tolerance. We actually looked at cultural carrying capacity in Mumford Cove, and we asked, do you feel there's too many deer, too few deer, just the right amount? Well, before we started the deer reduction, 90% of the people said we have way too many deer. After 4 or 5 years, that dropped down to something closer to 25-30%. So basically, we're shifting that community closer to cultural carrying capacity, and they were more acceptance and tolerant of deer because there were fewer deer. So it's not. There's really no magic number for cultural carrying capacity.
My second question, at an earlier lecture of yours that I attended, you described a timed baiting system, which sort of felt like part of that puzzle of drawing deer to a limited area.
Yeah, so one of the studies we did, we had automatic feeders, and those feeders went off twice a day, once at 6 in the morning and once at 4 in the afternoon. And then we had a camera set on them. So the first week, you see deer randomly showing up at the feeders. The second week, you see 2 spikes when the feeder goes off. The third week, you see 2 huge spikes. So basically, it conditions deer to come into the feeders at certain times. So obviously, if they're coming in at night, you can't shoot them. So you usually set the feeder to go off an hour and a half before dark. And deer then learn that's when the feeder goes off and then they come in. So there's been times where I've been in the woods in a tree stand, I'll hear deer walking towards the feeder, they'll stop 50 yards away, 15 minutes later the feeder goes off, then they finish coming in. So they came close and waited for that feeder to go off. So having a timed feeder is really helpful. Yes.
You mentioned that as a homeowner, you could have hunting on your property. But can you talk a little bit about the regulations and permitting of hunters in terms of like they're going through safety training and things like that?
Yeah, so you can't buy a hunting license unless you take a hunter safety course. So the state offers a hunter safety course. And you have to take that course and pass it in order to get a hunting license. So once you get your hunting license, you can then buy a deer hunting permit. To hunt on private land, you need written permission of the landowner. There's a state statute that releases homeowners of liability if they allow hunting without charging a fee. So if you say, yeah, you can hunt my property, but pay me $100 a season, then you're no longer released of liability. But if you don't charge a fee, there's a statute that releases you of liability. Yes.
So I found that an absolutely fascinating and balanced view and discussion. I thank you for it. I did want to just highlight the fertility conception alternative. This is not new. This is 20 years. And you suggested that you had to do it every year. My recollection of it, and obviously have nowhere near the knowledge you do, is that the fertility protection is more than a year. And I'm just wondering whether the neighborhood, faced with the alternative of encouraging people killing deer versus encouraging maybe an ongoing, it may cost more, I don't know what. It also feels a little safer than somebody wandering around with a crossbow.
Yes, definitely.
And so I wonder if you just give a little more balance to that alternative.
Yeah, so bow hunting. Basically, a bow hunter is sitting in a tree stand, shooting down towards the ground at 15 yards away. So the arrows hit the ground 15 yards away, so they're not stalking through the neighborhood. So if you sterilize the males, that lasts forever. The problem is, if you got 10 bucks and you sterilize all of them except for one, that one buck will make all the females. So the vaccination for the does, sometimes it doesn't work on them, and we don't know if it's because they don't have a good injection or what happens. So unless something has changed recently, my understanding was they have to be boosted frequently in order to maintain that infertility.
Yeah, I live over by the West Beach parking lot in a condo complex that has a berm between the parking lot and my condo complex that is lined with a very large, thick section of Japanese knotweed. That's a perfect hiding place for deer. And they never, this is city property. Is there anything that the city of Stanford can do to, I mean, my garden is a salad bowl for the deer. They come out, and over the course of several months, my plants slowly disappear. So I've given up planting much of any, even the deer-resistant plants. But is there anything the city can do, since it's city property, to come in and kind of patrol that area and get rid of the deer or mitigate the growth of the knotweed?
So,
It's much bigger than a little border between two houses. I mean,
yeah, I mean, so the city can apply for a sharpshooting permit, whether they would get it or not in this situation, I'm doubtful, because it's so well developed. But yeah, so they control what happens on city land, and their option is either to allow hunting or to sharpshoot, and
so
they can't allow hunting
so
because there's no trees.
option.
There's no, right, other than get rid of the vermin of knotweed.
Well, look, yes.
Yeah.
So I have a, not so much of a question, but like your opinion on it. The, every time you talked about either sterilizing the deer or the males, you talked about how if you miss one, they're going to have a set of twins. But if we're looking at a program, if you will, to reduce the population, two questions, I guess. How long do deer live naturally? And then second, if you get most of the deer sterilized, either male or female, you're really statistically lowering the odds of how many fawns there are going to be in the next year. So you could control a population that way without worrying about getting every one of them, right?
Yes, what you will do is reduce reproduction,
Yep.
but you're not gonna reduce the existing deer herd.
Right.
And they've been known to live for 18 years.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there a carrying capacity that the environment has? Are we looking at a situation that eventually we're gonna have more deer than people in Japan Point?
I don't think it'll go that high,
Exponential
unless you plant more food for them.
They might already be there.
I'm sorry, so your question?
So is there an inherent or a natural carrying capacity for a plot of land, say Japan Point, given the type of vegetation that exists here? Is there a terminal population of deer that's such that if they reach that point, there is inadequate amount of forage for them to have, that their numbers will be naturally limited?
I think you can have a lot more deer here than you have right now.
How many do we have now? How many do you think we have now?
One person that lives here and walks frequently said, I know there's at least 20. I'm sure there is. She said at least 20 based on her walks.
There's 20 in my yard. Way more than.
I mean, so to give an example, we always say carrying capacity of forested blocks is 20 deer per square mile. Once you get past 20 deer per square mile, deer don't die of starvation, but they impact tree regeneration, and they impact herbaceous plants. At Bluff Point, the population was at 233 deer per square mile, and we would randomly walk through the woods during April and find 15, 20 dead deer. On Charles Island, it's either 10 or 14 acres in size. There were 17 deer on Charles Island on this 14-acre property, and we had found 6 dead deer that died of starvation that year. Then we essentially eliminated the population because this was an important rookery for nesting birds. And even if we had one deer on the island, that would be equivalent to 67 deer per square mile. So that still would not allow forest regeneration. So we actually eliminated it, and every year we survey it, and if there's any deer, we remove them.
So this might not be a great question, but is there anything we could spray on the weeds in our gardens that would attract the deer to eat the weeds?
I don't have an answer to that one. Maybe some apple smell or something like that? Yes. So, hunters eat the deer.
Could you speak up?
What did you do with the dead deer when you found them?
I can answer that.
Oh, when you butcher dead deer?
Don't answer.
Oh, well, a lot of hunters butcher it themselves, but they can bring it to a butcher shop and have it butchered by somebody else. But most hunters will do it themselves.
But if they die on your property, what do you do?
Oh, you gotta drag it. You bag them to the street, and fix it ticket, city will pick them up.
Can I call you, Tom, to do that?
Sure.
Charlie and I have done
People-
that. Charlie and I have done that.
People will say, I got a dead deer in my yard, what can I do? You say, drag it to the street, and Public Works will pick it up. If it's in your yard, they're not gonna touch it.
Wow, bring it to the street.
Is there any kind of, animal urine you could buy at like Bass Pro Shops, this place, and spray around your yard to keep the deer away from your property because they smell the
Coyote urine or something.
Bear you.
Yeah, but then they come over to my property.
So there's nothing that in the long term works. For example, people have hung Irish soap in trees and it works initially, then deer get used to it. One guy said, I had my dog on the chain, the deer used to see the dog and not come in. Now they see the dog and they walk around it. They learn that that dog does not leave that spot.
the chain's only a certain length.
Right, right.
Just like if I manage to convince a few of my neighbours to engage in a hunt, can you just walk me through the practicalities of what that looks like in terms of what you have to erect, how long does it take, when does it happen, just the practicalities?
Yeah, so the season starts September 15th. So ideally, you talk to your neighbors before September 15th. And basically, you just need them to say it's okay for, if a hunter shoots a deer on your property and it crosses the line, it's okay for them to come and retrieve it. So nothing complicated.
And then after September, whatever, a bunch of guys come and you said they shoot down, so you erect something in the trees or?
Yeah, so typically you have what we call a tree stand. You put it up in a tree. The hunter climbs up the tree with a ladder, goes in a tree stand, and shoots down towards the ground. So one is you need a tree for the tree stand to go into.
Well, what about an upstairs window?
Actually, that would work.
Okay.
An upstairs window?
Right there.
I know someone who actually,
Not a balcony, but maybe that works too. Over how long? And then you bait the property, presumably, you put bait in the garden?
yeah, so you would use an automatic feeder, and they probably have to be refilled once every 3 weeks, but it needs to run for about 3 weeks to really build good patterns for deer to come in. So once it's run for 3 weeks, then the bow hunter typically hunts the first couple hours of the day or the last couple hours of the day. That's typically when deer are coming in. And nowadays, most bow hunters have trail cams that they set up at the feeder, and pictures are sent right to their phone. So they actually get real time, their phone will ding, there's a deer there now. at the feeder. So once you start seeing a pattern of when those deer are showing up, then the hunter comes down, sits in his tree. If the hunter says the deer coming in